Hello and welcome. I'm Jono Hayes and you're watching W News broadcasting from the Arabiya studios. And these are our top stories. Zelenskyy reunites with the coalition of the willing in London as the British Prime Minister pushes to send Ukraine more long-range missiles. Trade negotiations between the US and Canada are terminated after an Ontario advert calls out Trump's tariffs. And President Trump prepares for his tour of Asia, kicking off at the ASEAN summit in Malaysia. To our top story, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has been in London today, meeting with allies known as the Coalition of the Willing. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer wants the members to provide Ukraine with more long-range missiles to strike Russia and to stop President Putin. Earlier this week, Russia struck a nursery in the city of Kharkiv, killing 2 children. Here's what Starmer had to say when he welcomed Zelenskyy to Downing Street earlier.
I do think that this week we can really bear down on Russian oil and gas. Huge steps forward this week already. I think there's further we can do on capability, particularly long-term, long-range capability, and of course the vital work of the coalition are willing when it comes to the security guarantees that are necessary. So we've got really important business to go through with the coalition willing today.
Now we're going to speak to former Deputy Secretary of Defence for Europe and NATO. That's Jim Townsend. Jim, first of all, how significant is this London summit in shifting the Western response, at least, to Russia?
Well, these types of meetings, particularly the coalition, the willing, is very significant. This is how Europe is going to be able to do more to assist Ukraine now that the U.S. has stepped back a bit from its assistance. And this is particularly important when it comes to sanctions, to make sure that Europe is not importing Russian oil and that they really bear down on those ghost ships, those tankers that are moving Russian oil around. So this is an important group to meet and to act together.
These long-range missiles have been a bit of a sticking point, Jim. Could they change things quite dramatically in the battlefield?
Well, it'll change things in terms of getting long-range strikes into where a lot of the energy production is done in Russia. That's what Putin really feels. So that's number one, is try to cut back on the ability of Russia to refine oil to gasoline so that that's really felt at home in Russia. That's really critical, number one. And then number two, of course, a long-range strike is important on the battlefield to get at command and control and all kinds of war-making, decision-making and logistics that might be deep inside of Russia. That's really important, too. If we're not going to provide Tomahawk out of the United States, allies need to provide the best they can in terms of long-range strike.
Starmer saying that Putin alone doesn't really want to stop the war. Is that a fair comment, Jim, or is it political messaging that we're seeing taking place here?
No, I think this is something we've seen with Putin time and time again. There's an assumption in the West that Putin would love to sit down at a table, try to negotiate something in his favor. And that's really what he desires. But I don't see that. And I think we've begun to see that he really feels he can gain more by keeping the battle going and trying to do things on the ground. He's not in it for peace, not at this stage.
Look, Zelensky's had a pretty good week, diplomatically speaking, at least. This that we're seeing right now in Keir Starmer and Zelenskyy on the door at Downing Street, is it showing a renewed Western unity? Or maybe there's a short-term coordination that's going on here, because we've seen support before, but it seems to wane off after a little while.
Well, I think this coalition of willing has really stuck together. They really came together after that horrible Zelenskyy meeting with Trump a few months ago in the Oval Office. This coalition came together. They started talking about providing a security guarantee of some type to help bring both sides to the table. So they have stuck together and they've picked up that assistance job that the U.S. has kind of dropped on Europe's lap. And so they have been they have been a very important factor in trying to keep European assistance going. So I think of all the groups that meet in Europe, this is the most important one, and they have an impact.
Jim, the UK is speeding up these missile deliveries right now. We're heading in for the winter. How important is the timing here, especially given the cold, harsh winter? We've just finished that summer offensive that we hear so much about, but Russia may have the upper hand when we head into a winter offensive. But Ukraine still needs to survive the winter. So is it important that we get them out there soon?
Well, it's important that to keep a continued flow of these missiles, whether it's winter or summer. This is going to be a cold winter for everyone there. I think the Russians are going to feel it more than they've done in the past because of the oil shortage caused by the strikes deep into Russia on the refineries. This is something that those missiles are important to do. Also, in terms of a Russian offensive during the wintertime when the ground might be harder because of the extreme cold there, these missiles will be important to stop that kind of thing as well. So it's important to have not just a quick delivery of missiles, but a continuous delivery of missiles because, the war doesn't stop winter, spring, summer, or fall. And they need to have an assured supply of long-range strike missiles.
Jim, there is concerns and echoed across Europe, I think, that Russia may see this as a direct UK involvement in the war. Are we right to be concerned about that?
Well, I think they already see that. I think the Russians see this as NATO versus Russia, European nations like the UK versus Russia. They like to personalize this thing, make it personal, make it something that will put fear into people's hearts, that don't make Russia mad, don't upset Russia, don't cause escalation. But we've seen in the past that there's not a Russian response that we should be afraid of. And if we are afraid of them, that will only have more aggression rain down on Europe because the Russians sense a weakness caused by that fear. So there's nothing to be afraid of. And at a time like this, we have to show strength and unity.
What about the oil sanctions that have been put in place by President Trump? How will they play into the momentum of this, and are they likely to play a part in the conversations that have been had in London?
Absolutely. They've had a big impact, and they will play in terms of discussions in London as well as elsewhere as nations look at what they can do and the EU can do to suppress European importation of oil, as well as those, as I mentioned, those ghost ships, those tankers that the Russians use to move oil around. What these sanctions are going to do it imposes cost to India and to China for importing Russian oil. And my understanding is already in India, a lot of the importation has been cut back quite a bit to avoid running into these sanctions and this cost. So this is the Achilles heel, if you will, of Russia. This is their weak point. This is where they can feel pain, and that's in energy exports and domestic gasoline within Russia. Those are things that Putin is concerned about because those things are what he needs to keep domestic Russians on his side and also to fuel his war machine.
Jim Townsend there, we must leave it. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, trade tensions between the United States and Canada have flared again today as President Trump announced an immediate end to all trade negotiations between the two countries. It's after a Canadian advert endorsed by the Canadian government went live. The ad includes a quote from President Ronald Reagan that said that tariffs hurt every American, something Trump has called fake. Take a listen to this.
When someone says, let's impose tariffs on foreign imports, it looks like they're doing the patriotic thing by protecting American products and jobs. And sometimes for a short while it works, but only for a short time. High tariffs inevitably lead to retaliation by foreign countries and the triggering of fierce trade wars. America's jobs and growth are at stake.
For more on this story, we are going to speak to our correspondent in Washington, Sara Firth. Sara, thanks for joining us. We just watched the advert there. Surprise, surprise, President Trump appears to have reacted quite personally to this. But it's unusual, I guess, for a US leader to halt trade talks over something like this. I don't think we've seen something like this before.
No, Jono, it's really unusual. I mean, some would argue, I suppose, it's perhaps in keeping with President Trump's very personalized, combative style of governing. But look, you're right. American presidents have suspended talks before. President Trump himself earlier this year suspended trade talks with Canada. But that was over a substantive policy dispute. Canada had threatened a tax on tech firms, which they later rescinded and got the talks back on track. This time it's over that TV advert that you've just seen there, which President Trump has clearly seemed to have taken a very personal affront to. Now, Ronald Reagan is a pretty revered figure in Republican history. President Trump took to his Truth Social to call this fake, egregious. And Jono, just within the last hour, he updated that. He said Canada cheated and got caught. He's also accused Canada of trying to influence the Supreme Court here in the US because, Jono, next month they are going to be ruling on whether or not Trump's tariffs illegal. So that is quite the accusation. But in his latest post, he also went on to say, Reagan loved tariffs for America and for the country's national security. So there you go. Not the first time that President Trump has suspended talks over trade with Canada, but it is certainly the first time it's over a TV advert.
Well, in practical terms, how significant is this announcement, Sarah, from President Trump and the administration? So what is it going to mean in day-to-day terms for those US-Canada trade relations?
Yeah, that's important. Look, it's a major setback for Canada. There's no doubt about it. In terms of the practical impact, it's going to take a while for the impact to be felt. Look, Canada's Mark Carney, the Prime Minister, has been trying to have talks, it's thought, quietly with Washington to try and get them to soften their stance on Canada's tariffs, which are in some cases, Jono, as high as 35%, going up to 50% for some tariffs around metals. So look, it is significant. And those talks, that effort by the Canadian Prime Minister effectively stalled now in the wake of this announced suspension by Donald Trump of the trade talks. Look, the reality is the US and Canada, they remain very, very deeply intertwined trading partners. You still have a lot of that trade governed by the US-Mexico-Canada trade agreement. It was President Trump himself who came up with that agreement back in his first term in 2020, although that is going to be up, I think, for scrutiny in 2026. So for now, things will be on track. But as we said, the tariffs on Canada have been particularly harsh, and it seems any efforts to get the US to perhaps soften their stance for now frozen with this latest dispute that's erupted.
Look, the advert has used a clip of Ronald Reagan as well, and he's criticising tariffs in that. What's the reaction been in Washington to Canada using such a symbolic American figure in somewhat of a jesty way?
Yeah, it's certainly caused a stir and some anger as well, particularly from Republican quarters. I mean, that's demonstrated by President Trump's very serious reaction here. Look, you had the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation that oversees his legacy here in the US. They actually were the first ones to come out and raise questions over this ad. They said it misrepresents his message. You saw just the clip of him speaking there. They said that Ontario, which is the area that used the ad, it wasn't Ottawa, it's important to point out. They didn't say exactly how it misrepresented Ronald Reagan's message, but look, President Trump seized on that notification from the Ronald Reagan Foundation and has taken the action that he has. Now, Jono, here in Washington, quietly perhaps, some even Republicans would concede that Reagan was known for being very pro-free trade. Now, he did and was known to accept tariffs and use tariffs when it was in America's interest. But, it's a little bit of a controversial dispute that has erupted. And, President Trump clearly in his message feeling that it's not representative of what Reagan stood for. But look, he is such a revered figure, as I said, in particularly Republican history. So there is a sense that the Ontario government officials who okayed this ad that ran here in the US. It was sensitive timing with the upcoming US Supreme Court ruling on the tariffs. It was very provocative. A lot of people here in DC are seeing the action as provocative, and just perhaps the timing and the optics of it not the best. And the impact and the reaction from the president has been swift and severe, with the suspension of all trade talks for the time being. We've seen President Trump do this before, not over something so personal. So I think no one's expecting the tone to be softened anytime soon.
Well, the tone between both parties seems to be a very toxic relationship almost. Palsy-walsy 1 minute, the next minute we're butting heads once again. So if we're looking ahead at this, what are the chances that these trade talks are going to be revived? Or is there going to be a bit of a deeper breakdown in the relations between Ottawa and the White House now that we've something like this, which seems to be, and has been felt by President Trump, as almost a personal attack?
Yes, I mean, a personal attack is certainly how a lot of people here in DC that I'm speaking to is saying that President Trump has perceived this. It's difficult to make predictions with President Trump, isn't it? Because we have seen him, particularly when it comes to the tariffs, sort of go to and fro with his decision making. He is known to take these sort of swift actions, make these types of threats, suspend talks. As I said, he did suspend the trade talks with Canada earlier this year, but they got back on track fairly quickly. And that, as I said, was over a policy issue. This time it's a little bit tricky because of that personal impact. I mean, that ad that you watched there with the clip that was chosen by Ronald Reagan talking about how tariffs can be harmful for Americans, promoting that free trade policy that Ronald Reagan was, that's factual, he was known to be pro-free trade. That goes against President Trump's narrative. He's really cast himself here as the protector of American manufacturing and American businesses, this whole America first narrative. That ad runs completely counter and challenges that narrative. And it's coming at such a sensitive time with next month's Supreme Court ruling. So no question, President Trump has taken this very personally. He's taken that action. Would I like to predict where this is going to go? I'd say the people that I'm speaking to right now about this are saying that it is unlikely, because of the sensitivity of the timing around this, that you're going to see any immediate softening of President Trump's stance here. He's got the trip that he's on at the moment. Of course, that's going to be all important and taking up his time. But we have seen him reverse these policies and these decisions in the past. No question, Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney is going to have perhaps a little grovelling to do to President Trump if he wants to get those trade talks back on track.
Let's see how it plays out. Sarah Firth, our Washington correspondent and AI expert, thanks so much for joining us. The United States is weighing up a replacement to the US-Israeli-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which has seen its fair share of criticism when it comes to delivering aid. It says Washington seeks to find an improved way of providing assistance to the war-torn Strip. The ceasefire between Israel and Hamas has been in place for 13 days, with more aid entering Gaza as a part of the deal. Earlier, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio visited Israel's Civil Military Coordination Center, saying Israel must feel comfortable with the countries joining the International Stabilization Force for Gaza. Have a listen to this.
Obviously, as you put together this force, it'll have to be people that Israel's comfortable, or countries that Israel's comfortable with as well. Let me just say that I think there are a lot of countries that are expressing interest right now. I'm not going to get into a list of who they are. The journey to sort of get through the 21 points of the plan, to get through all the things that we're trying to achieve, is not going to be a linear journey. There's going to be ups and downs and twists and turns. But I think we have a lot of reason for healthy optimism about the progress that's being made. One of the reasons why I wanted to come today is sort of get a sense of the workflow, get a sense of the organization, and get a sense of the needs.
We can now cross live to Tel Aviv and talk to our correspondent, Blake Sifton. Blake, Rubio and Vance in the region so soon after this flare-up of violence that we saw in the last couple of days. How stable is this ceasefire realistically?
Good evening. When Vice President Vance arrived earlier this week, he said that the timing of his visit had nothing to do with events of the previous 48 hours. By that, he meant the very serious outbreak of violence that we saw in Gaza on Sunday. And certainly Vance, Rubio, as well as Witkoff and Jared Kushner have been very positive about the state of the ceasefire and the potential for it to hold. They've referred to any flare-ups of violence as essentially peaks and valleys, or as we heard just now from Marco Rubio, twists and turns. But their presence so soon after that flare-up of violence is being seen as a sign that the Trump administration is concerned by the threats to this ceasefire and that they do need to work hard to keep it on track, especially amid concerns that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu could be considering abandoning the ceasefire if he comes under the pressure from his far-right coalition partners. Now, there are also reports that the United States was very upset with Israel for their response on Sunday to the Hamas attack that killed 2 of their soldiers in Rafah. In response, they carried out a wave of airstrikes across Gaza, targeting some 20 locations and killed 44 Palestinians. And there are reports that when Vance spoke to Prime Minister Netanyahu, he delivered a firm message that the ceasefire must continue.
Blake, the plan mentions disarming Hamas. Is there any international appetite for taking on that role, especially because Hamas have been, well, so steadfast against that one point?
So according to the text of the 20-point peace plan that President Trump put forward, the International Stabilization Force was meant to enter Gaza to assist with demilitarization and assist securing Gaza in order for the Israeli military to fully withdraw from Gaza. Of course, the Israeli military is still in some 53% of Gaza. But yesterday, J.D. Vance, before leaving Israel, said that the International Stabilization Force would take the leading role in disarming Hamas. That's the first time anyone has said that. And of course, disarming Hamas is essentially the most difficult obstacle to be overcome in this entire process. Hamas have shown no willingness to be disarmed. They've suggested perhaps they would give up their offensive weapons like rockets, but not their small arms, not their guns. Vance said that the U.S. would not have soldiers on the ground in Gaza and that other countries have expressed an interest in joining the International Stabilization Force, but we still don't know which countries would be involved, when they would be assembled, and when they would be ready to deploy. There are reports that Indonesia and Azerbaijan have expressed interest, but they want it to be a UN-mandated peacekeeping force. And this idea that this force could potentially come in direct conflict with Hamas by trying to disarm them, perhaps against their will, could very well see many countries think twice about participating in this force. We need to remember that the Israeli military fought Hamas for 2 years and has fought multiple wars against Hamas, and they've failed to pacify the group, let alone an international peacekeeping force.
Speaking of points on this ceasefire deal, Israel promised for more aid to enter into Gaza. Why is Israel not honouring those commitments, especially when it comes to allowing the influx of aid right now?
Well, according to the text of the ceasefire, Israel is meant to allow some 600 trucks of aid into Gaza every single day. That's the amount of aid that the UN and other organizations say is needed to meet the needs of the people. Far less than that is entering Gaza each day. The numbers of trucks, as far as we understand, are usually between 80 to some 300 trucks. Now, the UN has said that the situation on the ground in Gaza is catastrophic. We've heard from the WHO. They've said that the effects of malnutrition will last for generations, and that at least a quarter of Gaza's population is still suffering from food insecurity. So the need is great, and the United Nations is calling on Israel to open all of the crossings into Gaza so that aid can flow freely into the Strip. For now, only 2 crossings are open, and crucially, none that go directly into northern Gaza, which is the area gripped by famine, according to food experts. A crucial crossing that we're also watching closely is the Rafah crossing between Egypt and Gaza. It's been closed for much of the last year and a half since Israeli forces seized the city of Rafah. It used to be a major conduit for aid, and everyone hopes that it can open. We understood that on Monday it was supposed to open to pedestrian traffic to allow people in badly needed medical care, as well as badly injured, to leave Gaza and others to return to Gaza. And then after that, hopefully it would open to truck traffic. However, following that outbreak of violence, there is now no timeline for Rafah to open.
Let's talk about this idea, Blake, of a humanitarian hub and also the so-called Gaza humanitarian belt. What exactly would that look like if it were to come into play?
So this is a preliminary idea at this stage, we should clarify, but there are reports that the U.S. is considering establishing, as you say, these humanitarian hubs, and they would replace the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. That was that very controversial Israeli and American-backed organization that distributed aid at distribution sites in 4 locations across Gaza. Now, according to this plan, these hubs would be based along the yellow line. There would be 12 to 16 of them along the yellow line, which is the area where Israeli forces have withdrawn to during the ceasefire. However, there's been multiple instances of Palestinians straying too close to that line and being shot and killed by Israeli forces. People often don't know where the line is, to the point where the Israeli military is now putting up yellow signs and big yellow concrete blocks to highlight where the line is. And of course, when the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation was operating, it was staffed by American military contractors, and aid seekers had to travel long distances through Israeli military lines, and there was near daily deadly incidents where aid seekers were shot and killed. So we do not want to see a repeat of that, essentially a new version of that with aid distribution sites built along this very dangerous yellow line. And there is also talk that the United Nations and other organizations would need to source their aid from these hubs in order to distribute it elsewhere in Gaza. Similarly to before, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation only operated 4 sites across Gaza, and limitations like that could very well see a limit on how much aid is available to be distributed in Gaza.
Blake Sifton in Tel Aviv. There we must leave it. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much, Blake Sifton. Let's take a look at some of the other stories that are making the headlines today. At least 19 people have been killed after a bus caught fire when it collided with a motorcycle in southern India. The crash triggered an explosion when the bike's fuel tank ruptured, engulfing the bus in flames. Eyewitnesses say passengers screamed for help as locals pulled out the survivors. A man armed with a knife has been arrested near the US Embassy in Tokyo. According to local media, a riot policeman was injured when police investigated the motive behind it. The incident came just days before President Donald Trump's visit is due to Japan. Voters in Ireland are heading to the polls today to choose their next president. With around 3.4 million people eligible to vote, the contest has been narrowed to Heather Humphreys, a former government minister, and independent MP Catherine Connolly, backed by Sinn Féin. A third candidate, Jim Gavin, remains on the ballot. That's despite the fact that he withdrew after the deadline. The results are expected to be announced on Saturday afternoon. A 13-year-old boy in New Zealand needed surgery after swallowing up to 100 high-powered magnets that he bought online from the website Temu. Doctors have said that the magnets, which are banned in New Zealand, cause tissue death in his intestines. Surgeons have removed the magnets and the damaged tissue, and the boy has been discharged from hospital. The largest group of regional and world leaders are in Kuala Lumpur this weekend for the 47th Association of Southeast Asian Nations Summit. President Trump is scheduled to appear as part of his tour of Asia. Amid trade tensions and global divisions, Southern Eastern Asia celebrated a historic milestone with Timor-Leste joining the summit as the newest member. Patrick Falk has this report.
It's a high-stakes summit for ASEAN and a crucial moment for Southeast Asia. Hosted this year by Malaysia under Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim, the summit is seen as a test of ASEAN's ability to stay united and relevant amid growing global rivalries. One key milestone for the regional bloc, Timor-Leste is finally taking its seat as its 11th member. After more than 2 decades of waiting since it first applied in 2002, the nation of 1.3 million people is now officially joining, a symbolic victory for Asia's youngest democracy and a sign that ASEAN can still expand its vision of regional unity. Its inclusion is seen as both a diplomatic and developmental win, giving Timor-Leste access to new trade and investment opportunities and a seat at the table in tackling shared challenges from climate change to disaster relief. But as the region celebrates that step forward, the agenda facing leaders remains daunting. The summit opens under the shadow of US-China tensions. President Trump's attendance marks his first trip to the region since returning to office. In Kuala Lumpur, he's pushing to preside over a peace deal between Cambodia and Thailand, claiming credit for brokering a ceasefire following a deadly border dispute, though Thailand's Prime Minister says he's not seeking US involvement. A meeting between US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Chinese Vice President He Lifeng aimed at ironing out trade differences is going to be very closely watched. The two are expected to discuss trade, tariffs and supply chain security, a sign that even amid confrontation, both sides are keeping channels of dialogue open. That meeting will also help set the tone for an expected Trump-Xi encounter next week at the APEC summit in Seoul. The Chinese leader is skipping the meeting in Kuala Lumpur, sending Premier Li Qiang in his place. Now, the leaders of Russia and India will also be absent, but other global players, including Brazil's Lula da Silva and South Africa's Cyril Ramaphosa, are attending, underscoring how Southeast Asia has become a key stage for global diplomacy. For ASEAN, the challenge is balancing those competing interests while pushing forward its own priorities, from digital integration and regional food security to the creation of a cross-border renewable energy grid. If successful, that initiative could accelerate Southeast Asia's transition to clean power and help shield smaller economies from future shocks. And as Timor-Leste joins the fold, ASEAN is showing that even in a divided world, the project of regional cooperation is still alive. Patrick Falk, Al Arabiya English.
Let's take a look at the top business news. A German company is cashing in even in unexpected fame after its lift was used in the Louvre hoist. Bocker launched a playful ad showing the machine that helped thieves escape with €88 million in crown jewels. The company said it used a touch of humour, and social media has praised the move as a marketing genius. Gold prices fell more than 1% today, ending a 9-week winning streak. Easing US-China trade tensions and anticipation of the US inflation report reduced demand for the safe haven metal. Spot gold was down 1.5% at $4,063 an ounce, while silver, platinum and palladium also slipped. Turning to sport now. Marcus Rashford says he hopes to stay at Barcelona after his loan from Manchester United ends this summer. The footballer can be signed permanently for £28 million. That is below the £40 million United would normally ask for. Rashford, enjoying La Liga, credits the move with reviving his career and will play his first El Clasico this weekend. Tom Aspinall and Cyril Gane are set to clash at UFC 321 in Abu Dhabi this weekend, both making weight under the 265-pound limit. The card also features a women's strawweight title fight, plus key bantamweight and light heavyweight bouts as well. Fans are counting down to Saturday night's action. Our next guest is a renowned painter whose pieces can be found in galleries all over the world. Born in Damascus to a Syrian father and a Lebanese mother, Sara fled civil war in Syria in 2015. Her artistic work takes inspiration from the Syrian conflict, channeling it to portray her subjects. Sara, we're going to speak to you live now. Sara Shamma, who is with us from Damascus. First of all, your art often reflects conflict mixed with emotion for those who have seen it. How has Syria's war shaped your creative voice from what we can see?
Hi, thank you for having me. The Syria's war is a big event in the life of all the Syrians. So it's normally that it will affect your whole life. So for me, I was inspired a lot by this war. I was not affected as many people who were really affected in a bad way, but of course all the Syrians were affected. So it was normal for me to react to this war. So I did a lot of portraits inspired by this war. And I did an exhibition in London in 2015. I called it World Civil War Portraits. So that's how my main inspiration behind the war.
Sara, you said that your work is a bit from life and a bit from photographs. How do you balance reality and the reality that you've experienced with imagination to create these amazing works of art?
For me, there's no big difference between imagination and reality. The dream, the life of inside your dreams, it's very, very, very rich. So I always imagine, I always dream, even if I am sitting in front of you, I will be dreaming in another shape, in another dimension. I will be seeing you transparent, maybe. So for me, it's something instinctive that I do in imagining all the time.
There's something we can see in your paintings, which is this sense of void, which I think a lot of people will look at it and think, there's so much going on here. You can see somewhat of the pain that you were going through. What is the message that you hope people who look at your art take away from that sense of void and that sense of anguish and almost pain that you can see in the paintings?
Yes, I would like my painting to penetrate the subconscious mind of the viewer and leave him with a lot of questions and hopefully find some answer or not. But I would like my painting to shake the viewer and to enter inside you and to change something inside you, because that's what my paintings does to me. So I would love for the viewers to experience similar experience.
You've supported the World Food Programme for many years now. How important is it to use art in order to make an impact?
It's very important because, of course, it's not highly impactful like economy or like wars. But art is very important because artists always react to pain, to suffering, to hunger, to everything humanitarian. So for me, it's natural to try to support any kind of humanitarian act. But of course, that will not change the world. At the end, art is not capable to change the world.
And just to pick up on that, art is different for every person who looks at it. It means something entirely different. I'm always fascinated by one person's interpretation can be so wildly different than another. You're dealing with audiences in London and you're dealing with audiences in the Middle East. Do they respond differently to your work because they've had different experiences which may resonate with what they can see in your artwork?
I think geography doesn't form the way how people react toward the art. It's something very personal. So you see the same reaction sometimes from a person in the street, from a policeman, and the same reaction from a very sophisticated man in London, maybe. So I don't think people react to art depending on their geographical state or depending on their identity. It's very, that's how I discovered in my art. It's very personal and it's very deep in the same time. So it's related to the subconscious mind of the viewer.
Speaking about your art, just yours specifically, as we hopefully move towards some level of peace going forward, and if we do get to that point, do you think that that will have an impact on the art that you're making and how you portray your art? Or is it too difficult to move on from that intense personal experience that you've had and there's enough material in there for you to continue to paint like this?
There's no peace. If you go back to history, there's no peace. It's always have been war. So there is a war all the time between all the people, between different layer of the society, between different class of society, between man and woman. So war is existed. So we cannot deny it. And my art, it's not necessarily a reaction to war. Because if you go back to my history, let's say when I was 30 or 20 years ago, I'm interested in the dark side of life. It's very, very inspiring. It has everything. So not necessarily the war is the main aspect that shaped my art. It's the dark, hidden side of reality, of reality, yes.
Well, it's been insightful to speak to you, but also insightful to view your work. Sara Shamma, thank you so much for joining us. And a final reminder of our top stories. Zelenskyy reunites with the coalition of the willing in London as the British Prime Minister pushes to send Ukraine more long-range missiles. Trade negotiations between the US and Canada are terminated after an Ontario advert calls out Trump's tariffs. And President Trump prepares for his tour of Asia, kicking off at the ASEAN summit in Malaysia. And that's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can follow us on X. And we're back in just a couple of hours with W News Extra Best Bits. Goodbye for now.